afternoon, good evening, wherever you are logging in around the world today. And thank you for joining us for our inaugural SOA Chats event for the student organization community at Northwestern. My name is Joe Littell. I'm an assistant director. I use he, him pronouns. And based on feedback from our staff and student org officers, as well as advisors, we wanted to present a little bit about transitioning org leadership at Northwestern. And we've got some really exciting panelists from a broad range of student organizations who are joining us on the call and participating. So just to start, I wanted to, just offer, I hope everyone's staying safe. I hope everyone's well. I know that especially our folks in the student organization community who are taking that on in addition to adjusting to remote classwork and life in general being adjusted. I hope you all are well and healthy and supportive of each other. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about why transitions in student organizations matter. Why this was such a popular topic. We'll cover some transition basics, and then we'll connect with our 4 student panelists. We have a number of prompts for them to respond to, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. If folks have any questions, feel free to add those into the chat. I've got one eye on that and one eye on the visuals, as hopefully you all can see. And we'll get to those either in the middle of the presentation or towards the end. Also, if you're joining us and you like, please feel free to add your name, preferred pronouns, as well as any organizations you're involved with. So transitions in student organizations are unique. Many of us manage transitions in a lot of different ways in our lives, but one area where transitions in a student organization can be very different than a job is in a job, just like a student organization, you likely had a predecessor that's leaving a role as you enter it. And then, they may have left behind some guiding reference tools, but in a professional setting, often when you transition in, a supervisor is there to kind of check in with you regularly, make sure you're getting your feet under you for the first few weeks and you understand the role. But a lot of times in a student organization, perhaps you don't necessarily have that luxury. So it's often overlooked in the success of the organization as a whole, too. There might just be an assumption that perhaps, you're going to be able to just kind of figure this out based on observing, but good communication is really key in the transition process. And just like many student organizations, there's such a great learning environment there as well. So there's a little more forgiveness to experiment, try things, adjust, and a professional setting might not necessarily offer that luxury. We see a range of leadership involvement through a lot of transitions, and hopefully our panelists, through their own personal accounts, can share a little bit about this. Between registered student organizations, competitive sports teams, and student-run department-sponsored programs, we know there's over 400 student organizations at Northwestern, and that means there's more than 1,000 transitions that happen at Northwestern every year. Below, you'll see a general range of how that transition can go. And on the far left, I didn't forget to put text in there. Sometimes it truly is silence. The person who had a role before you just doesn't communicate with you at all. Maybe they graduated, maybe they left under bad circumstances, and you're not really even getting a chance to learn from that person as you enter into a role. Next up is just maybe a very brief, see ya, good luck. Ideally, there's at least some communication, whether that's in the form of a single meeting or conversation over email or remote at these times. And some organizations are able to have their folks put together reference materials. So maybe your predecessor put together a journal that they updated periodically that was relevant to the role, in the hopes that whoever succeeds them could access that and review that on their own time. And then you have folks that maybe they're sticking around the organization in a different role or in a different capacity. And so they're able to offer personal support until you're completely comfortable in your role. Then at the other extreme, we have the folks that they're still around too, but they just aren't letting go. They aren't letting someone new an opportunity to breathe. And that can be a challenge as well. So for folks who are maybe outgoing or vacating a role, if you're unsure if your successor might be feeling that, just communicate with them. Say, I want you to feel like you own this role, like you are the individual that's best suited for this. Please tell me if you feel like I'm doing your work for you or if I'm overstepping some boundaries. Because you want to have a really communicative environment in your organization. Ultimately, organizations can be fragile when it comes to transitions. All it takes is maybe, a new treasurer who isn't given information about the fact that they have to be signed into a SOFO account that can really bring things to a halt. Or maybe it's someone who's in charge of PR and marketing, not knowing anything about advertising guidelines, and that can get the whole organization in trouble. So transitions can be really critical for an organization, and that's why we wanted to provide this today. We also think about transitions as a little bit of scaffolding too. So at the base level, we're talking about an outgoing person making it clear to someone incoming what the basic requirements are to keep the organization at the level it's currently at. So that would be some of those logistical things, like making sure if you re-registered the organization for the following school year, that your successor knows, hey, look for an email from SOA, you'll be expected to do that. If it involves SOFO training, if it involves any other sort of paperwork, maybe if your organization is connected to a national group, there might be some administrative work that's supposed to be done annually. Making sure those things get done is just kind of the basic level. The next step up from that would be a clear understanding of the role. So making sure that folks, feel like they really understand what might be kind of like a broad concept like marketing or PR, and really get a sense of what you did last year and how the role works and how the role interacts with everyone else in the organization and others. And we see the peak of this as having strong communication with your predecessor, understanding what their objectives were, what they were able to accomplish in the role, what they weren't able to accomplish in the role and why, but also having a strong sense of direction and confidence in yourself in the role too, so that you feel like it's a real seamless passing of the baton. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists and ask that they introduce themselves. Folks, please share your name and pronouns if you wish, class year, and an organization you represent. And because I see some windows on the side, I'm going to go ahead and start with Sam. Sam, go ahead and unmute yourself if you're able, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, totally. So I'm Sam. I am a senior. So 4 weeks left. Very exciting. I use he, him, his, and I am the outgoing president of Stitch. So was the editor-in-chief, co-editor-in-chief for the last year.
Perfect. Mia.
I'm also a senior at Unite, so I'm here representing that club as well.
Terrific. Cami.
Hi, I'm Cami. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am a junior and I am one of the NUDM executive co-chairs for this year. My other co-chair is also on this call, Aisha.
Terrific. Great transition. Hi. Aisha.
I'm Aisha. I also use she, her, hers. I'm also a junior. I'm the other executive co-chair for this year, and I was also a productions co-chair for on exec last year. So I'm like kind of transitioning in and out at the same time, which is kind of weird.
Terrific. Well, thank you all for being here. And folks, if you have any questions you'd like to add to the chat, feel free. But we have a few prompts for our panel to kick things off. I'll start with Mia for this first question. Mia, so what is the transition process at the end of each cycle in your organization? And what resources do you find helpful to prepare you and your peers for a new role?
So for any nights, we usually transition around the middle of winter quarter, start like reaching out to other members in the club and telling them that these positions will be open and to apply for these positions. And then once we have the applications for those positions, we will review them and have like small interview sessions about like 30 minutes long with each of the applicants, where the former exec member with the of the position that they are interested in will sit in and briefly go over like expectations and if they're, I guess, ready for that role and why they think they are. And then after the selection has been completed, by the end of winter quarter, we'll be fully transitioned in. So for example, for a treasurer, that would include SOFO training, that would include basically passing on like the voucher book, passing on all these materials to the new treasurer and making sure that they understand what these materials are, what they kind of are for. And during spring, I kind of like let the new treasurer get a feel for what exactly is their new role, and what like they can expect from this role. And that if they have any questions, they can feel free to ask me while I'm still here. But then in the fall, once I'm not there on their own, other exec members who may have been in the club for longer, what exactly they might be able to do.
Terrific. Sam, how does it work over in Stitch?
Yeah, so over in Stitch, it's kind of similar. We do our exec board interviews at the end of winter quarter. So we talk to current members and see kind of where they'd best be fit. We do editors in chief first. So Nina and I spent a while talking to prospective editors in chiefs over there, and then after that, the new editors in chief and the old editors in chiefs spend a lot of time picking the next exec board and just having a nice conversation about what Stitch is looking for next year. We're lucky in that we have a lot of sophomores and juniors in leadership roles, so they're definitely really helpful in our transition over. We also have transition guides for positions. So Nina and I spend a lot of time writing the EIC transition guide, which gives like all the SOFO information they might need and any general information, because we do print a magazine and that can get kind of dicey, and learned a lot about that through this year, just exactly how to do that. So we really I think a really important part of transitioning is just being available for your successor, and if they have any questions, just allowing them to text you and answering those questions. I'm definitely in contact with the new editors in chiefs right now about funding and the funding application. So definitely like just being available, I think, is what's most important.
Definitely. Cami, anything to add from how it works over at Dance Marathon?
Yeah, so we have a similar process. So all of our co-chairs for the past year will write a very extensive transition report that goes through the main things that they're responsible for, timelines for the year. They can get up to like 90 to 100 pages, so very extensive transition reports. And then we expect that they have 3 meetings with their new co-chairs to go through that transition report and to go through the timeline for the year. For us as well, in the exec co-chair position, we have a very similar structure with that. So we make sure that people are meeting to talk about each initiative and what they did, and then also making sure that we have that physical transition report to look back on, so that you can check in about anything that you're doing and see how they did it last year, what worked well and what didn't.
Absolutely. And that's common in the professional setting too, you know, everyone moves on from a job in different circumstances or unique circumstances, but in an ideal world, you know, if there comes a day when I'm no longer the assistant director at SOA at Northwestern, you know, I'll be leaving behind some guides for whoever would succeed me. Aisha, anything to add on how it works over at Dance Marathon to kind of add to what Cami shared?
Yeah, for sure. So another big part about our transition process kind of starts during the application process itself. So our application is super, super detailed. We ask for a vision, we ask for goals, and we ask for tangible action items you're going to take to achieve those goals. And in asking those questions, it forces the applicants to actually think about the position they're applying for and think about the plans that they're going to implement after. They're also supposed to talk with all the members of the exec board before applying just to get a better idea of like what went well, what we want to improve. So the application process is also a really good time to cultivate that within your new exec board.
Terrific. Thank you all. The next question I have for everyone, what's the biggest challenges you face entering a new role? Think back to, maybe this role that you're wrapping up or one before, and is there anything you might do differently upon reflection? I'm going to go ahead and start with Cami for this one.
Definitely. So I think one of the challenges that Aisha and I are actually currently facing is that with the model of our transition, meaning being that past co-chairs are meeting with new co-chairs, a lot of the processes from last year are like being automatically passed on to next year. And I think that's something that we are trying to implement is, okay, well, what if we have a different expectation for that role or for that event? Or what if we didn't really enjoy how it was done last year? How do we communicate that best to those people? And how do we make sure that that transition isn't going to transition like bad habits or things that we don't necessarily want to keep continuing in our organization? So I think that one thing that we've done to kind of deal with that is like really just setting expectations with each of our co-chairs as we go into the year and saying, we understand that like this is how it was happened last year and like we totally get that and you're probably basing your work off of last year, which is totally fine, but like this is something that we want to change a little bit.
Aisha, anything to add to that?
No, I think that was perfect. That is very accurate for us right now.
Cool. Sam, what were the biggest challenges you faced entering a new role at Stitch, and do you feel like there's anything you could have, should have, would have done differently?
Yeah, totally. I think, sorry, my phone just started going off. I definitely think one of the biggest challenges was definitely that transition. I know Nina and I really struggled at, I think the way we talk about it is we had a really hard time spring quarter and then fall quarter and winter quarter, we felt really, really successful, which was awesome. And I think like part of entering any new role is just kind of learning exactly how you want to do it and exactly the changes you're going to make. And I think that was a really long learning process for us. But I think something I definitely would have done differently is I think asking questions is huge. And I think during spring quarter, I was so scared to ask questions of like our advisor or SOA. And I think both of those people are resources, and I think it's really important to rely on those. And so I think I definitely, when it comes to SOFO, should have asked our advisor and SOA a lot more questions.
Thanks for that. Mia, how about in NU Nights?
I think the biggest challenge, but also like I guess the biggest reward was that my involvement was increased like tenfold. I had to take like a more active role in the organization instead of being kind of like a passive member who like attends events and helps out. I had to actually think about like what exactly we need to do logistically and help like plan all of that out. But that was of course like expected in the role, but also it was like very challenging to get used to that kind of level of involvement. But I think in the end, after all these years, I really felt that it was rewarding to have such an active role in that way. Something I would have done differently was probably I wish I kind of didn't just like a lot of people have been saying, I kind of just took the role. And I maybe should have like just thought about like what exactly I wanted to change in this role, what I could do differently. Because I changed like a few there, but everything ultimately kind of went the same as the previous treasurer did. So maybe just thinking about how to rework things to make it run smoother or make it an easier task to do. I think that might be something I should have done a little differently.
Well, thanks for that. Yeah, and I know in these organizations, time is so limited, right? I mean, not only is it balanced with all the academics and life in general, but whether you transition into a role in the middle of winter quarter, say in February, or early in spring quarter, like April, the reality is that term is only a year long. And while you may be able or want to do some work related to your organization over the summer months, collaboration is really tough for a lot of exec boards, because there's folks who are doing other things kind of everywhere around the world, whether it's like internships or they just have other obligations. So when you then kind of break it down with breaks and everything else going on, there can be a sense of urgency. And, in terms of the window to enact change and leave behind change, sometimes that transition can be really critical to just get off on the right foot and get the basics down. So thank you all for that. The last question I have for the panel is, what advice would you give an org leader who's about to take on the transition process? So, you've identified who's going to succeed you in a role, and now you want to make sure, okay, I'm going to get this person set up for success. So, what do you do to make that happen? And what advice would you give someone else to make that happen? I know Aisha has an obligation at the tail end of this, so I'm going to start with her for this one.
That sounds good. I would say if you're vacating a role, it's really, really important to have a written transition report, in my opinion, because like you said, you don't want all the institutional knowledge and all like what you've learned over the past year to just fade away since the turnover is so fast in student organizations. So definitely keep like a running document of like everything you learned, what went well, what didn't go well, and what recommendations you have for the future. Because a lot of my transitions honestly just focused on like, this is how we do things instead of like how to improve things, and this is how to make big institutional changes, which is something I definitely struggled with initially. So definitely focus on that. What else? I would say like multiple touch points is also really important. Like I think not for Dance Marathon, but for a different role when I was getting transitioned into that, it was just one transition meeting and then I'm done. But I think like that's super overwhelming for your predecessor or your successor. And setting up multiple transition meetings, like maybe like spacing them out and maybe having one like before each quarter is so useful and helps them digest the information.
Perfect. Cami, anything else to add on behalf of Dance Marathon or any other experiences you've had?
I was going to say that if you are transitioning into that new role, just like be a sponge and learn everything that you can. I was never on the executive board before becoming the executive co-chair of Dance Marathon. So I've had to just take a huge learning curve and learn about all of the organizational intricacies and everything like that. And like just taking you and giving yourself some time to like really look over things and learn about things before you really jump into things is super helpful to just get that institutional knowledge and figure out, come into it with a pair of fresh eyes and be like, okay, what seems like it's going well, what maybe isn't going as well as it could. I think that that's a great step in the transition process to take.
Perfect. Mia, what advice would you give an org leader who's in the middle of that transition process?
I definitely agree with everything. Outgoing officer to keep like a record of important tips that they have encountered throughout the year of experience that they had, and for the ingoing officer to definitely like meet with the outgoing officer as much as they can and to ask questions when they really need it. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I'm sure the outgoing officer understands that this role is a pretty monumental thing to take on. So if you do have any questions, even if it's the slightest of things, to definitely ask and make sure you like.
I think you cut out at the very end there, Mia, but I think we got it. Definitely ask questions and, really any questions just to make sure. And that's critical. Everyone's working towards a common goal in your organization. So there should be support and grace when it comes to someone new kind of trying to understand and improve things in that environment. Sam, anything to add on behalf of Stitch or any of your other experiences for advice you'd give someone that's taking on that transition process and transitioning someone into a new role?
Yeah, all I would really add is I think it's really important that the transition guide you do throughout the year, I think it can be really overwhelming to like have to just sit down and write everything you can remember. And if you have something in the middle of the year, you're like, oh, this is a big situation, I need to tell someone, make sure you write it down because you might forget later. Even if you just have like an ongoing list and like a notebook, like I think that's like something that's definitely super helpful. And can really be beneficial to the organization.
Absolutely, that's terrific. Yeah, I know. Again, time is limited, and it's one obligation among many that folks in these roles have. But taking the time to kind of go back to your notes and actually edit and polish and reflect and refine shows that you care about your successor's time as well. I guess the last thing I'll add is, as folks transition out of a role in an organization, that's many times kind of like the last really impactful moment that you have with that organization. So even if you feel like your role and your term in that role were a success, maybe you're involved in like an event that went really well, and you put a lot of work towards it. If you then just kind of say see you later and don't really transition in someone new, that can be the taste that's left in that person's mouth then. Is feel like, oh, well, they just kind of did it for themselves and not for the organization. So for folks that are transitioning out, be sure to take the time with folks who are new entering a role. They were you likely a year ago. And that can really keep the organization building on the foundation that you've created. So with that, I think we can wrap. And I want to thank Mia, Cami, Aisha, and Sam all for joining us.